Hello, everyone. Welcome to lesson 5. So today we're going to watch a quick video on gardening ergonomics by our wonderful OT students. And I sent out an email with the handout that comes with that video. So yeah, let's get into it. Let me find it here. Oh, gotta share the screen. Okay.
Hello, my name is Mickey.
Hi, and I'm Jordan. We're your student occupational therapist here to talk about gardening tips and tricks to keep you safe during this gardening season.
Gardening is an activity that can be enjoyed by the whole family. The following will ensure that you get the most out of your gardening experience while keeping you safe in the process. We are going to be going over the 4 P's: plan, position, pace, and protect.
So the first one, as mentioned, is planning ahead. No one likes multiple trips to get things. Save your strength, bring all the tools with you, keep them close by. Bring a water bottle to stay hydrated during the hot summer.
The second one is position. Learning the proper ways to position yourself while gardening can help you avoid a sore back now and in the future. We're going to be going over 3 tips. The first one is to protect your back. Keep it straight while you work. Try not to bend over in uncomfortable and awkward positions. The second one is try kneeling or squatting to do the tasks that are close to the ground. And this again will avoid putting yourself in awkward and uncomfortable positions. Then the third tip to remember is that repetitive movements can cause strain on your body, so switch up your movements every now and again to avoid discomfort.
The third one is pacing. Take frequent breaks and break up your tasks into smaller chunks. Listen to your body, don't overwork yourself. Drink lots of water and ask for help when needed.
And the fourth one is protect yourself while you work. Wear a hat, apply sunscreen, and bring the appropriate gardening gear that you're going to need. For example, gloves and a shovel. Now that you're ready with all of the equipment you're going to need, it's time to prepare your body. Part of protecting your body is making sure that you stretch before gardening to prevent muscle strains and injuries.
So the following are a few stretches that you can do at home before gardening, during, and afterwards. We encourage everyone to try them with us right now.
The first one is a low back stretch. So with your back straight and your legs spaced out almost shoulder width apart, we're going to encourage you to place your hands on your lower back and press forward at giving your lower back a gentle stretch. We're going to hold this for just about 5 to 10 seconds.
So the next one is going to be stretching the front of your legs. So we're going to find a sturdy object, be it a wall, a tree, or counter in this case. You're going to grab hold, take one of our legs, bring it back towards us, and gently pull it towards our back. It'll just be a gentle stretch, shouldn't hurt at all, and we're going to hold this for about 10-15 seconds. We're then going to switch to the opposite leg, do the exact same thing, again for about 10-15 seconds. Overall, this can be done 2 to 3 times for each leg to get a good stretch in.
This last stretch is for your wrists. With one arm straightened in front of you, we want you to use the other arm to bend your hand back down towards you, giving your wrist a nice stretch. We're going to hold this for just about 5 seconds. When you're ready, you're going to turn your wrist over and do the exact same thing, pulling your hand down towards you. After you've done one hand, try the other. So you're going to straighten your hand out, use your other hand, bring your hand back, and flip it over, and try again.
So these are just a few stretches, but if you want a more comprehensive list, please visit the website we listed on the back of your gardening handout.
Happy gardening!
All right. Big thank you to Micky and Jordan for that wonderful video and for putting together this awesome handout. Super helpful. Thank you so much. All right. let us start. All right, so now let's move on to the, excuse me, the main lesson, which is, let's see here. Oh, let me do a quick garden update. So our gardens are looking really amazing, and yeah, so a lot of the seedlings have sprouted up and they are ready to thin out. So you can go back to our previous lesson. I think I talked about thinning out, and also in the seeds lesson, which is the second lesson, talks about thinning out seedlings, and there's some great information in there. All right, let's go to our PowerPoint. All right, and our topic is staking plants and composting. So let's take a look. So what is staking? It's pretty straightforward. Staking is, to stake a plant is to, staking a plant means driving upright stakes, usually one wooden stake per plant, into the ground and fastening plants to them using plant ties. So fastening the stem of the plant, not the branches, to the stake. The stakes help the plant stay upright and grow upward even during strong weather. It also keeps them upright if their fruit or flowers are heavy, especially helpful for tomatoes and other vegetables with big fruits, although it's not as important for, you know, zucchini, cucumber, which like to vine out on the ground. All right, what plants should I stake? Flowering perennials are a good thing to stake. Flowers that, yeah, like to grow up can really help them get even bigger and grow even better. Top heavy house plants, those are good to stake. I think this picture here, they're using a moss stake, I think, which is interesting. Vegetables, of course, here's our tomato plant, and saplings. Although saplings, probably you would use bigger stakes. And stakes are really important, especially here in Manitoba, because you know how windy it can get. Very windy, and our plants just need that extra support to grow upwards and to stay put and stay healthy. All right, so some options for staking. You can just do a simple single stake. You can use a ring style support. Here's an example of a strawberry support. This one, the purpose is to keep the strawberries off the ground so they don't get like moldy or like soggy on the ground, and keeps the critters from eating them, and it's easier to find them and pick them. The only problem with this kind of support is that, as you can see, if you would try to remove the support, you will probably damage the plant. So once it's there, you want to try not to remove it. Tomato cages. This is what we have here in our gardens. Really useful. They can be used not just for tomatoes, beans, peas. Beans and peas are really important to stake because they're vines, they like to grow up. And it gives them even more sunlight and space to grow. And it takes up less space in your garden if you stake your veggies, because instead of growing out, they grow up. Yeah, and these I just learned are called obelisks. Obelisks. They're kind of this pyramid shape, but they're pretty much the same as tomato cages in what they can do. And trellis. Trellises are really useful for viney things and actually can look really nice. They can be very decorative and can be used for lots of things. You can even use like a chicken fence as a trellis, even though that doesn't look as nice, but really recommend a trellis. Trellises and tomato cages I like. All right, that's all for staking. Staking is pretty much straightforward. If you have any questions, let me know. Yeah, here in our gardens, we're using tomato cages. That's what we got, and they work really great. Okay, let's move on. So let's talk about food waste in Canada. 58% of food produced in Canada is lost or wasted each year. That's well over half of the food produced in our farms, I guess even like baking, cooking, all that stuff, everything that goes bad that you didn't manage to eat over the week from your groceries. So much is lost. Yeah, 35.5 million tons of food produced in Canada is lost or wasted each year. 32 of this, amounting to 11.2 million tons, could be rescued to support communities across Canada. That is a lot. This is the equivalent to the weight of almost 95 CN towers. That's crazy. That's hard for my brain to wrap around, but that is a lot of food, and it's being wasted, put into landfills. Food waste costs Canada's economy more than 49 billion each year. That is crazy. Each year, food waste in Canada creates about 56.6 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions, which contribute to global warming and the climate crisis. Heats our atmosphere and our earth, which has dire consequences. Organics wasted in a landfill produce methane gas, which is 25 times more damaging to the environment than carbon dioxide. So, yeah. And lastly, the average Canadian household spends $1,766 on food that is wasted every year. So that's a lot of food wasted and a lot of money wasted. So, not to bring down the mood, but those are some facts, and that is my segue into composting. Composting is a great way to reduce that waste. So, some pros of composting. It reduces household and food waste. That's great. That's what we want. And it helps keep moisture when we put it in our soil. It helps keep moisture, suppresses plant diseases and pests, and enriches soil with important nutrients. It reduces the need for chemical fertilizers. So composting is an organic fertilizer. If you have compost, you can use it in your garden, and it works the same as fertilizer. It helps your plants, it keeps your soil healthy, and it's just very helpful. And to create your own compost is a really great system if you can do it, because you're producing so much less waste, and it's a cycle of you put the compost, you compost in your compost pile, you take the finished compost into your garden and grow your veggies, and then once you harvest your veggies and you have leftovers, you can compost those. So it's a really great cycle. What was the word? I had a really good metaphor. Oh yeah, compost is like organic recycling, which I think is pretty cool. We all know about cycling our paper and plastic, but our food we can actually recycle through composting. It's a bit different, but I like that analogy. Compost includes and encourages beneficial bacteria and fungi that create nutrient-rich humus. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. by breaking down organic material. So it has some really important nutrients and bacteria. Yes, bacteria is actually, some bacteria is very helpful and good for you. Just like the bacteria in your gut, this bacteria is good for your soil and your compost and your veggies in turn. So, and it benefits your garden and your yard. It helps your garden tremendously. And like I mentioned last lesson, it improves the quality of your little yard environment by compared to chemical fertilizers. It has a really big long-term difference. Yeah, so how does composting work? Well, let's get into it. This is a long thing. This is a more sciencey, nerdy explanation if you're interested, but I'll just read it. During composting, microorganisms that live in the soil eat and break down the organic material into its simplest parts, creating a fiber-rich humus containing carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. This process requires aerobic respiration, which uses oxygen from the air when we turn the compost. The microorganisms need water to live, and when they're doing their job, they release carbon dioxide and heat. Temperatures can rise from 30 degrees Celsius to 66 degrees Celsius. So it can get really hot in your compost. And it should, that's a good thing. From decomposing to finished compost, the process can take from about 3 weeks to a few months if managed well, usually about 3 months, I'd say. Yeah, so composting is pretty much the same as decomposing. We're just speeding up that process. So those microorganisms in the soil are what break down your veggies and turn them into that fertilizer, that compost. And so they're really important. So we got to feed them with air and water. Yeah. And here's a nice little graphic to help understand how it works. So organic waste is everything, all our garbage, our trash that we put into the compost, which I'll go into more depth in a second. And then we add soil, which has the microorganisms, and we water it, and because it needs water and moisture to work, can't be too dry. And then when we mix it, it adds the air, because it needs this aerobic respiration, fancy word, just means it needs air to work. And then as that works, it produces carbon dioxide and heat, which then creates the finished compost. Yeah. All right. So how do I compost? You're probably asking. Well, composting requires organic waste, soil, water, air, and heat, which we just mentioned. The best time to start composting is in autumn because it takes a while, and once you can't really do it in winter because it needs to be hot in there, right? The microorganisms need like over 38 degrees Celsius to be doing their job. So it's better to that in the warm months. That's when it's going to work. Otherwise, it'll just freeze. So yeah, autumn. Let's see here. Things you can put in compost: fruits and vegetables, leaves and grass, newspaper, eggshells. And there's lots of things that you can put in the compost. Pretty much any vegetable matter is really good, and paper and yeah, I'll talk more about that in a sec. Things you don't really want to or can't put in compost would be meat and dairy. Technically, meat and dairy can be composted because they do decompose, like we know, but they can smell really bad and they take longer than vegetable or plant matter. Yeah, you can't put charcoal ashes because they are toxic actually to the microorganisms in the soil and your plants. Charcoal ashes can be toxic, so avoid putting that in your compost and in your gardens. Animal waste, just human waste and animal waste, excuse me, they just smell really bad and they can carry diseases. So better not to put those in compost. Diseased plants, you don't want to spread that disease to your garden. And invasive weeds. Invasive weeds, their seeds and their spores can actually survive through the composting process, and then they can infect or grow in your garden once you have composted. It can be really annoying. We all know how annoying weeds are. Let me just look at my notes here. Yeah, so meat and dairy, because it's high in fat, they can actually be composted, but the compost pile needs to be very well taken care of, turned often, needs a lot of heat, and obviously meat and dairy can smell if it's rotting and decomposing. Okay. Oh yeah. To quicken the process of any of these materials, sorry, meat and dairy, to quicken the process, you could put them in a blender or food processor, because if they're in smaller pieces, it'll break down faster. But I don't really recommend putting meat and dairy in your compost unless you're like a serious composter with lots of experience. And it helps to, for your things you can put in the compost, it helps to blend them up or chop them up. It just breaks down faster. All right, so how do I compost? What I need for composting is, first you need to choose a site, a structure, add ingredients, care for and feed the pile, including watering, and then collect your finished compost for use. Sounds easy enough, right? Well, it can be a bit complicated, but let's go into more detail. So choosing a site. Let me just look. Okay, so you want it to be downwind from your house because it can sometimes smell. It's decomposing, so it can smell. And yeah, make sure you know your local laws, because some places, they don't allow certain composting, or they don't allow composting at all. I think it's here in Manitoba, I think it's good. I think we're allowed to. I should have checked beforehand, but yeah, we're pretty good with composting. Your neighbors might not like the smell, so maybe don't put it right by your neighbor's house. You don't want too much wind, although wind can provide airflow, which is important. We need airflow, we need that oxygen for the microorganisms to live. But too much wind can dry it out, and we want to keep it moist. Yes. Keep it slightly shaded. It does need heat, but too much heat can, again, dry it out. And it's good if you have like a large tree to maybe keep it close to or under that tree. That way it has shade during the summer, but it also has sunlight in the winter, once the leaves have all fallen. We also need good drainage where water doesn't sit, where water doesn't sit and soak into the pile. We want it to be moist, but too much water can make things kind of rotten and too slimy and wet. Yeah, and we want to put it on bare earth, not concrete. We want that, yeah, organic microorganisms, all that to be in there. It just breaks down a lot easier, and concrete might inhibit that growth. Anyways, and you want about 3 feet by 3 feet space. So when choosing this spot, you kind of want to clear out about that much room, 3 feet by 3 feet. And when you have chosen your site and cleared it, made it ready, then you can choose a structure. So there's 2 different types of composting. There is passive and active composting. So passive composting is when you kind of throw everything into a pile and just leave it and let nature take its course. So that's one option for a structure of composting. So just put it in a heap. It's simple, easy, but takes longer than active composting. So this one can take quite a while because it's just the natural way things compost. This passive composting, you're not really adding anything to it. You're not really taking care of it. You're just leaving it, and it kind of does its own thing. This way, it's a bit hard to get the finished compost underneath, and it's a bit hard to keep it, clean in a compact area. A good idea to keep moisture and heat in is to put a tarp over this pile. Yeah. So the opposite of passive composting is active composting, and that's what we're going to be talking about from now on. So this requires daily upkeep. It depends. You maybe don't need to do daily. Maybe every few days. Check on it. Check the temperature and turn it. I'll talk about turning in a second. So you can use chicken wire, cement blocks, a wooden structure. You can build your own structure out of these things. These you add new material on top with soil. You put soil on top. You turn this compost frequently, and you collect the finished compost at the bottom. Another option is a multi-compartment bin. You've probably seen one of these before. They're like a black, they look kind of like a garbage can. They're black. And they have 3 compartments. So in the top, so you add new material in the top compartment, the top bin, and then you move partially composted material to the middle bin, and then the finished compost goes in the bottom bin. Yeah. So these are some pictures of your options for composting. There's not really a set rule of what it has to look like. You can use any kind of structure. This is just like a pile for that passive composting. Here's that chicken wire, chicken fence. You can see they have layers of leaves and grass and branches and all that. Yeah. This one, a wooden one. That's pretty good, useful one. It's nice and big, easy to access. It's easier to access compared to this chicken wire one. Here's the one I was talking about, this black 3-compartment bin. So you put the new material in the top, and you take out the ready compost, the finished compost at the bottom. Here they use like cement bricks. They got lots of leaves in there, and yeah, it's another structure. See, it doesn't have to be closed off, but it keeps it, confined in its space really well. Another option, I'm not sure how well this works, but this person is using just a plastic bin. So there's lots of options for structure. You can also get a turning, what is it called? A compost tumbler, compost tumbler. This way it's a lot easier to turn your compost, because turning your compost is very important, first of all, and it can be really hard because you gotta shovel everything kind of and mix it all up, especially if you have a large amount of compost material. That can take a lot of work. Yeah, so this is a good option to make it a bit easier, and it's a lot faster. These compost tumblers are a lot faster, although they are a bit expensive to buy. So yeah, that's the option. That's another option. So when you're making your compost, you got to know what you can and can't put in the compost. So we already talked about that a little bit, what you can't put in. Kitchen waste, vegetables, eggshells, corn cobs. So corn cobs, you can just throw them in how they are, but because they're bigger, it just takes longer. So you might want to chop them up or shred them. That would take less time to compost. Yard waste, you can put leaves, weeds, pine needles, branches, twigs, hay, and straw. All can go in your compost. I actually just heard someone just told me today that pine cones are really hard to compost. So maybe don't put pine cones in your compost, which is a nice little tip I got. They do not compost well. All right, so you can put coffee grounds in, which are really great. They really help the nitrogen levels in your garden, in your compost, in your soil. You can even include the paper filters. You can add tea bags and paper napkins. All that paper stuff is totally fine put in compost. You can put newspaper, sawdust. So when you're putting in your compost, put in about 75% brown material, which is like your yard waste, your pine needles, your branches, your hay, your straw, your coffee grounds, paper, sawdust, newspaper, yeah, all those things, your brown materials, 75%, and 25% green material. So that's like your grass, your vegetable matter, your weeds, leaves, all that. Oh, I forgot to mention that you can even compost indoors. There are options for indoor compost bins. I think you would want to give it a lot of attention though, because it might start to smell, but that's an option if you can't put a compost structure in your yard. Yeah, so cover materials with lots of soil, then add water to moisten, but don't soak it. Then mix it with a shovel or pitchfork, which will provide air. Yeah, so that's how you add your ingredients to your compost pile. And I just wanted to add that I think it's a really good thing to even just throw a pile like we were talking about, a passive composting pile in your yard. If you have space, I think it's a really good idea because you don't really need to do anything with it. It will take longer than this. If you don't want to commit to all this work for composting actively, you might as well try a passive compost pile because you really don't need to do anything to it. You just throw stuff in a pile in the corner of your yard, and it's just really good to like reduce your amount of waste, and who knows, you might get some really good compost and you can put it in your garden. Yeah, so I highly recommend it. I have a passive compost pile in the back of my yard, and I also have one of those multi-compartment, those black bins. Yeah. Okay, so now on to care and feeding your compost. So you can add new layers of materials and fresh soil about every 3 days, putting it into the center of the pile once it's started to heat up. So the heat is like super important for the compost. You want to check if it's hot in the middle. So this is from Planet Natural, which is a really good resource if you want to learn more about composting. I highly recommend it. To get a reading on how the pile is doing, wait at least 2 days after assembling it, then pull away some of the surface material. 6 inches down, the pile should be noticeably warm, if not downright hot. Check the pile every day, covering the hole after each test. When the material is clearly cooling down, it's time to turn it. So, as you're checking that, if it's doing really well, if it's really hot, it can be, you can add more materials and add them into the center of the pile where it's the hottest, because they'll break down the quickest. Let me just see here. Yeah, how often you turn it depends on the temperature in the center. Most composters turn about every 2 to 3 weeks. Composters, as in people who compost, they turn about every 2 to 3 weeks. You can work in lots of new materials when you turn it. So turning basically gives it that oxygen and gets so the process, when it starts to heat up, you kind of want to leave it to heat up, and that's when that breaking down is really happening. You can add small amounts of new materials while that's happening, like I said, in the middle. But when it starts to cool down, when the process is slowing down, you want to turn the pile and add new ingredients to it. So turning the pile mixes everything together. And yeah, let's continue. Water the compost regularly. I can't really say a specific how often, but just, see how moist it is. You really don't want it to be dry. You want it to be moist all the time. And yeah, depending on the weather and the placement of it. You can also add worms to speed up the process, which you can buy at your local garden store, garden center, I think. But worms can speed up the process by like over 50%. So they do a really good job of breaking up that material. So how do I turn compost? This is the most difficult part, I'd say, of the composting. So again, from Planet Natural, here's a quote: "For the fastest, most efficient decomposition, a pile should be left essentially alone to cook until it starts to cool. Then it should be aerated at once and left again." So when it's cooking, it says left essentially alone, but you can still add ingredients into the middle, the hottest part. Because the middle is hot, the hottest part, and then on the outsides, it's probably cooler. When you mix it, along with adding air, you are starting the process over again, and the things that were on the outside that didn't get decomposed will move to the inside, and then that process will start again of decomposing, and it should heat up again. So once you notice that it's cooling off, yeah, so you can buy compost thermometers. So a good temperature, if you end up getting compost thermometer, they're not necessary, but 54 degrees Celsius is a good temperature to keep, to know that that's like a good temperature, that your compost is decomposing and the microorganisms are doing their job. So 54 degrees Celsius. And if it drops below 38 degrees Celsius, it's time to turn it because it's cooling off and the process is slowing down. So you need to start the process back up again. So when you turn compost, here, let's see what I have here. Use a shovel or pitchfork to mix contents, depending on what method you use. So, or what structure you use. A wire bin can be lifted off the pile, put beside it, and then the contents you can fork back into the wire bin. For some, pull everything out of the bin and fork it back in portions, adding new material as you go. A good rule of thumb would be to have 6 inches of old material or material that was already in the composter, 6 inches, and then add several inches of new material, and then continue that until it's full. And the process will start again. In multi-compartment bins, when one compartment is empty, the contents of the previous are forked into it. So once you have finished compost at the bottom of your bin, right, there's 3 sections. You take out the finished compost, and then the compost that was in the middle, that was semi-decomposed, you put into the bottom. And then the contents that was on top is now slightly more decomposed. You put it in the middle, and then you add new stuff on top. Hope that makes sense. And you can also buy a compost aerator, which lifts material from the bottom to the top and obviously aerates things so it gets lots of oxygen, and you don't have to mix it. You don't have to turn the compost. Yeah, so how do I know when it's ready? Well, let's talk about that. When you add new layers and turn the compost, you're mixing new layers with intact trash with partially decomposed layers. The partially or finished compost will settle at the bottom because the particles are smaller. So usually your finished compost will be at the bottom. And once you think it's ready to be used, if it's broken down enough, then put it in your garden. If it's working properly, the pile will not smell bad and will be quite warm. Like we said, it can actually get hot in the middle. That's what we want. And if your compost doesn't get enough oxygen, if it's not being mixed enough, if it's too wet, it's not getting enough air, enough oxygen, it can go anaerobic. It's a fancy word, but it means it's just not getting enough oxygen. The microorganisms are not getting enough oxygen and can produce ammonia. And usually you'll be able to tell if that's happening because there will be a strong smell. I'm guessing it'll smell like ammonia, and you should turn it immediately if you start smelling that ammonia. You should turn it right away because to get the air in, get the process happening again. Yeah. Let me just look here. Yeah, by turning it, turning your compost, cool materials from the outside can move to the active middle where it's warmest and aerated. Yeah, that's what I just mentioned. It is probably done when you can't recognize any trash. The size has decreased 50 to 75%. It isn't producing as much heat. It smells earthy and it's dark and crumbly. That means it's ready. Honestly, there's different levels of compost. Your compost can still break down even if you've already put it in your garden. And so it doesn't need to be completely like fine dirt like that. It actually yeah, it's really depends on you, and it's a lot of experimentation to see what works for you. But these are just some ideas of how long it would probably take. Yeah, smells, yeah, so smells earthy and it's dark and crumbly. compost needs to cure in cool temperatures for a couple weeks before it's ready to use. The decomposing process is still happening. So even if you see that your compost is not heating up anymore, it looks ready, it still needs to decompose a little longer for a couple weeks because there are actually some other decomposing processes that happen after the microorganisms have worked through it all. So larger bugs come and do some more decomposing, and yeah. So I'm just thinking you could even, to keep your compost pile going, because some people, they have their one compost pile, they have all their ingredients and they put it in and they don't add anything new to it. That's the fastest way, although that way you need a lot of ingredients at the beginning and you can't add new ingredients, which is not really helpful when we want to reduce our waste. So like I was talking about before, it's probably easier to keep adding new material as you go. And you could even maybe take out the compost that needs to cure, take it out in a separate pile, let it cure, and then put new compost in your pile. Just an idea. I don't know if that works, but I'm just thinking to keep the process going. And when it's done, add it to your garden like a fertilizer. Like I said, composting is an organic fertilizer and it does your garden wonders. You can even buy compost at some garden centers, although I recommend trying it at home. And if you're having trouble, if you want your compost to work faster, if you started a bit late in the season, you can buy compost starter to speed up the process at your local garden center. All right, that is the end of the lesson. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I hope your gardens are going great. And if you have any questions, email me, and I'll be happy to answer them and help you out. And happy gardening. Have a great week, and happy late Father's Day. Bye.